Alright, it's Barry, and today on Grow It I've got everything that you need to know about tomato blight. I think this year's up there with one of the worst for blight in the UK for quite some time, and it's only the middle of August and it should be the height of the tomato growing season, but everywhere I look on YouTube, Facebook groups and on Reddit, there's people posting pictures of the tomato plants and fruit being destroyed by blight. Mine haven't escaped it either, so first I'll explain what blight is and why it happens, how you can identify blight, what you can do to prevent it and what to do when it turns up. And as you might have guessed, this also means that this year's tomato feeding experiment is unfortunately prematurely over. I'll go over that a bit more later on in the video, but for now let's have a look at the basics of tomato blight. Tomato and potato blight are both caused by the same fungus, Phytophthora infestans, which is capable of killing a plant in as quickly as within 1 week. Tomato and potato plants are closely related and the fungus will freely move between both species, so if you see blight in your tomatoes, for example, then I'm afraid it's also very likely that your potatoes are going to be next. Phytophthora infestans is a water mould which can be devastating for tomato and potato crops due to how easily it can spread between plants, especially as it can travel on the wind for up to 30 miles. Blight was particularly prevalent in Europe in the 1840s and it destroyed potato crops across the continent, leading to famine and over 1 million deaths with mass emigration of over 1 million more people. The fungus thrives in damp, cool environments with optimal spore production occurring between 12 to 18 degrees C, and infected plants will develop lesions on the fruit, which I'll go into later, and these tend to spread a bit more quickly when a warmer temperature range is of around 20 to 24 degrees C. Looking at those temperatures, it starts to become more apparent why we've had such a problem this year, and we've had a really hot couple of weeks in June and July, followed by a complete drop-off in temperatures, often below 15 degrees, and complete with all the persistent rain and the high humidity that we've had. All of this combines to make the perfect conditions for blight, and this is why we only normally see it later in the year once the growing season's over. When affected by blight, ripening tomatoes develop lesions which look like sunken brown spots, but as your tomatoes might not be ripening yet, you might see it first in the leaves and the stems of the plant, and leaves start to go yellow and they darken to orange before going brown and shriveling up to almost nothing, and the fruit will often go brown or yellow before rotting entirely. Plants with blight will also just drop unripened fruit as the stems begin to rot, and the sad news is that if the plant is infected, even the picking fruit early won't stop them from prematurely rotting. It's also important to make sure that your plant definitely do have blight before you get rid of them, because nutrient deficiencies usually show up as leaf colour problems as well, and they can be identified fairly easily. They might just need feeding, especially during August, as all the nutrients go into developing fruit. On that note, almost all of my tomato plants started to show signs of blight in the last couple of weeks, both in the polytunnel and in the greenhouse, and they are totally destroyed. So let's get into the polytunnel, have a look at the plants. I'm sure there's some tomatoes in different stages of infection that we can have a look at as well. So here we are in the tunnel, and as you can see, all of these tomato plants are looking really sorry for themselves, and as you'll see, this is just what happens to your leaves. They tend to shrivel up and go brown, and you can see that they are, well, you probably can't see, but they're also covered in tiny little mold spores as well, and this is what generally blows around once the wind starts up, and this is what sort of transmits on the wind. Here's an example of a tomato with the lesions that I mentioned, and as you can see, this tomato is sort of a yellowy colour, and then it's got this dark brown patch on here. This is where it's just going to totally rot through, and that's a telltale sign of blight. Here again, we've got these tomatoes which are sort of misshapen, they're not fully developed, and these have started getting little spots on them everywhere. You can see those, and again, that means that these are on the way out. These are my beef tomatoes, and these are absolutely massive. These are one of the ones that I'm the most disappointed about because they're absolutely enormous, and I took one off the other day. It was red and it was ripened, and then I just looked in the middle of it and it was totally rotten inside, and it was just full of mold and there was a slug living in there. So yeah, it's just really disappointing when they end up looking like this, and these are so close to being ripe as well. I think that's the most disappointing part, is that they're so close to being ready. The blight pathogen is microscopic with spore-producing structures called sporangia, which break away from infected leaves and are then carried on the wind. And the actual infective spores, which are called zoospores, are released from the sporangia into water droplets, and they need to swim on the plant surface. So literally a wet leaf surface is all that's needed before penetrating into the leaf tissues. The pathogen then spreads rapidly inside the leaf, killing the cells, which is where the yellow and then brown colour originates. The majority of blight infections in gardens come from spores that have been blown on the wind from other gardens and allotments and farms rather than from infected soil, but a 4-year crop rotation is the best course of action for tomatoes and potatoes, just to avoid any soil-based pathogens turning up again in the next couple of years. It's also worth noting that since the spores spread using the wind, it tends to be outdoor tomatoes that are at the highest risk of blight infection, and that's when the weather conditions are correct for spore production. Whereas growing your tomatoes indoors, like in a greenhouse for example, can give a bit of protection against the infection, but it's still possible that the spores can get in through windows and doors and vents, or even just by not washing your hands or your tools when moving from outdoor plants to indoor plants. The infection then spreads much faster than with outdoor plants due to the high humidity and surface moisture that's usually present within an indoor growing area. The good news is that despite blight being very difficult to avoid, it isn't impossible, and with these 5 easy steps you can reduce the risk of blight infection and keep your tomatoes healthy. So first off, keep your tomato plants dry. The blight spores need water to infect plants, so by keeping water away from leaves it can help minimise infection. This is one of the reasons that outdoor plants are more at risk, as it only takes a bit of rain to completely soak the plant, making the leaves easily accessible for blight. An easy way to minimise transmission risk is by making sure to grow tomato plants away from your potato plants. At least then, if either one of them becomes infected, it won't immediately spread to the other. Maintaining good airflow around plants helps to reduce transmission, and this can be achieved by removing lower leaves and making sure that any leaves are prevented from touching or resting on damp soil. You can also help maintain a better environment by making sure to close windows and vents on colder days, or especially on windy days when spores are most likely to be flying around. Possibly the easiest way to avoid blight is to grow tomato varieties that have been found to be blight resistant or tolerant. This is something that you'll normally find in the seed information or even on the seed packet itself, and of course this drastically reduces the range of tomato varieties that are available, but it's a good idea to maybe incorporate a couple of blight tolerant varieties into a larger selection of varieties, so that in the event that blight turns up, or especially if it's as severe and early as it's been this year, you're less likely to lose your entire crop of tomatoes. I probably should have done that myself, but as I didn't get any blight at all last year, I didn't even think about this happening, so that's all been part of the learning curve that comes with allotments though, so I won't make the same mistake again. Blight tolerant tomato varieties include Furline, Lozano, Lassetto and Mountain Magic. And there's even the certified 100% blight resistant variety Crimson Crush, which apparently also tastes better than the other disease resistant varieties as well. And finally, practicing good hygiene when you're dealing with your tomato plants is one of the most important ways to minimise the risk of pathogen transmission or plant infection. Easy steps that you can take are things like washing your hands and using hand sanitizer before and after touching plants or fruit, and that includes potato plants. If you use gardening gloves, use a pair specifically for tomatoes and then wash them on a regular basis, and also clean any tools that you use such as knives or scissors with disinfecting wipes or spray before and after using them on each plant. This is one of the most important steps that you can take to reduce cross-contamination between plants, and it's an essential step to take when there's any chance of blight being present. When it comes to disposing of blight-infected plants, fruit, potatoes and soil, it's generally best not to put them into your normal compost heap, as while it's possible for correct full composting to totally destroy infected material, it's still possible for infected material to persist in the compost, ready to reinfect your plants and beds again next year. The easiest way to get rid of infected plants is to just stick them into your green bin for collection by the council, or in a garden waste bin at the tip, as these high volume green waste processing plants will usually fully compost and destroy any pathogens that are present. If garden waste collection isn't available in your area or country, then other alternatives are burying infected material in a deep hole below growing depth, or in an area that's not being used for growing tomatoes or potatoes and won't be dug over for around 4 years or so. Failing all of that, you can just burn the infected material, at which point leftover ash will be fine to add into your regular compost heap. I have a specific compost bin for getting rid of diseased plants, weeds, roots, rhizomes and seeds, which is the easiest way for me to get rid of anything that I don't want to go back onto my good plants, or anytime soon anyway, with a much longer composting time, and it's well away from the rest of the allotment as well, so this is where all of my plants are going to be going. So with all that, unfortunately, I won't be able to finish my tomato experiment this year, as all of the plants have got to go, and it's definitely disappointing, but I'll start it back up next year and I'll make a couple of adjustments to make it even better. And that's everything for today, so hopefully you'll be able to keep an eye out for blight in your garden or allotment and be able to minimise the risk to your plants. And don't forget to like this video if it's helped, and let me know in the comments if you've had blight turn up this year yourself, and I'll see you next time.